You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Carlos Noche. Today, we're talking about the current state of sales. More importantly, prospecting. How can we be more effective on our outbound outreach to get the right buyers to actually even engage with us? And to help us with that, we have Jason Bay, founder and CEO of Outbound Squad, improving skills of sales teams through training courses and coaching. Jason, welcome to the show.
Good to be on. You mentioned this before we hit record, but two bald guys jamming on sales. It doesn't, you got a little more facial hair than I can grow, but it doesn't get any better than that, man.
I need to balance it out, the glare off my head with a little bit of facial hair, I guess. Although it's all turned white, so I don't know. It isn't as cool as it used to be.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're happy to have you. All right, so here's our normal question to kind of warm up the audience to you, Jason. What's something that you're passionate about that those that primarily only know you through work might be surprised to know about?
Yeah, my wife, Sarah, and I are just optimizers to a T. So in business, it kind of makes sense to optimize because there's an ROI in the form of profit or commissions or whatever it might be. But I do apply that same level of optimization to our relationship and our personal life. And to give you an example, we're about to move to New Jersey and we have a Notion board with like all of the things that we need to do. It's got a checklist of like the status on all of these things, like setting up internet and doing all this other kind of stuff. We do like a weekly meeting on Mondays to review our finances, and there's like prep that we do for that meeting. So if you don't know me personally, you probably don't know that aspect about me, that we're very, very systemized and like to optimize just about everything in our lives.
Jason, I'm a little bit jealous because I think I'm more like you folks, and my better half would be like, yeah, just take care of it. Don't, you got it. I'm covered. She's a person who would go on vacation and go, we're just going on vacation. What else you need to know? There's no planning your days out or setting stuff up. We're just going to go relax, Carlos. So I think I might be vacationing with you guys soon.
Yeah.
So Jason, tell me a little bit more about yourself, your career. How'd you get to this great place?
Yeah. So my very first sales job was actually 2007, I'm a freshman in college, and I worked for a company where I went door to door selling house painting services. So my foray into sales, if you will, was cold outreach or cold calling or whatever you want to call it. And in that case, it was getting doors slammed in my face. And I was actually pretty good at that job. I made, back then $30,000 over the summer for school running the business. I didn't do hardly any painting. I was taught how to market, how to sell. They had really good sales training, how to hire painters, etc. And a lot of the things that I learned face-to-face going door-to-door in a B2C setting, it's still stuff, Carlos, that I teach to sales leaders and sales reps in a B2B setting now. By the way, a lot of the work I do is helping reps with cold calling. And I'm like, dude, this is easy mode. You don't got to see the person. They can't slam a door in your face. They can't be rude to you. They just hang up. Like, come on. But a lot of the principles around dealing with rejection, the mindset, pattern interrupt, doing something a little different than what's expected. A lot of the stuff I learned with that company as a sales manager on how to motivate people to do those things, how to manage to KPIs and metrics, and how to reinforce principles that we're teaching. It's really all the same stuff in B2B, except for in larger deals. Obviously, there's multiple decision makers. It's not just a husband and a wife kind of thing. So I did that for about 4 or 5 years. I was a marketing director with them. I traveled all over the country doing sales training. And that kind of brings me to my current career. In the last 11 years now, I've been primarily consulting business to business, helping with both prospecting and full cycle sales. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we've really settled into business to business software as a service companies and then professional services. So I've worked with companies like Gong, Zoom, Rippling, Xfinity, like big companies like those. And then also, I'm working, got a call right after this with a company that's got I think they have 6 account executives and 4 BDRs. So sort of everywhere in between. If you have product market fit and customers want to buy your stuff, they get good outcomes from your stuff, and you're growing your team, that's typically where I'm able to help. And a lot of what I focus on is, I think the hardest part of selling is just getting your foot in the door. Larger enterprises, especially, you're not going to have a C-suite executive or a senior vice president typically come through an inbound channel on a website. You typically have to be proactive about starting conversations with them. So how do I get people to open, look, and respond at our emails? How do I get them to pick up the phone and respond to me via that way? Social. How do I multi-thread if I have a meeting set up with, in my case, a sales manager? That's not obviously not the person that's going to sign a $50,000 check to do a training. So how do I multi-thread and get to the VP of sales, to the CRO? That's a lot of where we play today.
I kind of started out this whole thing, the state of sales today, and maybe everybody says it's always hard, but for whatever reason, today's our reality, right? So in today's reality, one of the things I hear a lot about is, hey, there's a lack of pipeline, right? So this whole, I need more opportunity, more at-bats. If we call that prospecting, I think most reps suck at it. So let me start with this question first. When you do your programs, is it mostly for business development reps, or is it for account reps? Hey, it's for both and it's the same program?
Yeah, I'll answer that question here in a sec. I think to just mention, I want to address what you said around sales being hard right now. There's a lot of different ways that you could look at this, but sales, the difficulty of the job tends to follow the economic conditions. So I think we've been 10 years or more without a recession, and there's a lot of economic uncertainty. It tends to be harder to sell in an obvious state when there's a depression, but when there's economic uncertainty and people don't know what's coming, it tends to be harder to sell to them because budget thresholds go down. So the people that we would sell to that could normally greenlight something, now there's multiple people that need approval. I'm interacting with a lot more of procurement and finance in deals, as are my clients. So you definitely could say it's harder to sell right now. I mean, there's stats that show sales cycles have lengthened by 40% since 2020, according to vendor, like quota, fewer reps are achieving quota in tech at least. So it is definitely harder statistically to sell. And just anecdotally, in observing this with my clients, it's harder to sell right now than it was 2 years ago, let's say. But I think these cycles, just like the economy, we tend to go through every 10 years. So second part of your question was around our training programs. So when I'm focusing on outbound, we train both BDRs and account executives. I would say 70%-ish of the work that I do right now is with account executives or full cycle sales reps. So people that need to prospect and sell. And the common excuse for not prospecting, if you have a business development rep or SDR, is that, it's not my job. Marketing's supposed to do that. SDRs, that's why I have an SDR. It's like I'm above that. That's
like
one
kind
of thing that I hear. Yeah. And then the other thing too is, I think a lot of it's really an exercise in productivity and time management. So yeah, if I'm working a lot of deals, how do I make sure, just like exercise, that I carve out an hour a day to do it and prioritize that early in the day so that I'm least likely to procrastinate doing that? So I think one, it's, do I understand the importance of it, which the best account executives, according to Sales Loft data and Bridge Group data, they self-source around 30 to 50% of their pipeline, of their opportunities. So the best account executives, the ones making President's Club, they are very, very good at self-sourcing because their time is better spent. Like, they can get the meeting with the VP or someone in the C-suite a lot better than that SDR that has 6 months of career experience has. It's nothing against those folks. They're getting through their learning curve, and they're much more likely to blow that opportunity than an account executive. So I think a lot of it, and we can get as detailed as you like, is really, how can I be really strategic and intentional with this time and really apply the 80-20 rule and say, hey, let's just get out all of the noise and let's really hyper focus on where my time is best spent.
So it's interesting. So first off, hey, I agree with you of it being cyclical. I know I look super young on this podcast, but I've been around the block a little bit longer than you have. And I'm with you. These things come in cycles. Think back to when, COVID was kind of that uncertainty. Nobody was doing anything. Everybody's freaking out. think back to 2008. I mean, you can just keep going back in time, and there's people that are older than I am would, to keep going back. Oh yeah, well, remember this. So I'm exactly that it's cyclical. And I'm also with you in the fact that it's a skill set. I think since we've had such a good economy overall over the last, let's call it 10 plus years, our muscle for prospecting has atrophied. Yeah. And, some people have gotten away with not having to prospect as much and still be able to be productive. So when we first think about, you mentioned importance or making it a priority. What tips do you have to kind of make that something that you do on a weekly, kind of like working out? I could talk about it being good for me. I could do it this week. Oh, next week I'm busy. Oh, something came up. And then I kind of fall off the wagon. And I feel the same way about prospecting. So how do we make it in something that we can do, or we do more consistently?
Yeah. Just like with anything else in life, if you say that you don't have time for something, it really means that it's not a priority for you. So what does it mean to prioritize something? So last year I had really bad anxiety from just being overworking myself. And that's just something that happens with people that run businesses. It's a little tougher to have boundaries. And I had to take a week off of client work because I had so low energy from all the anxiety I was feeling. And what I realized in that moment, this is what my doctor told me and what my therapist told me is, hey, you have to prioritize cardio. That's one of the best things that you can do if you're dealing with anxiety. And you got to do this 4 or 5 times a week. So what did I do? Because I'm a crazy person. I signed up for Orange Theory later that week. And literally now I'm up at 4:30 in the morning, Monday through Thursday, Monday through Friday sometimes. I'm getting 3 to 4 1-hour workouts in. And I just did one earlier this morning too. And for me, it's how does your calendar reflect your priorities? And typically the things that are the most important, not the most urgent necessarily, the most important are things that you prioritize early in the day. That's the easiest way to do it is 1, decide that it's a priority and commit to it. And 2, from a block and tackle standpoint, make it the first hour of your day. Make it 8 to 9 a.m. This is sacred time. I like to put an asterisk, NN asterisk on the calendar in front of an event that's non-negotiable. So this is a non-negotiable. It doesn't matter. Unless I'm deathly ill, I'm getting up at 4:30 and doing that workout prior to me starting the work. So committing to it, super important. There's other things that you can do to create that type of accountability that I think are really important. One is having an accountability buddy. So having another account executive on the team or a small group of people who are committed to doing the same thing, just like Michael Jordan had the Breakfast Club, right? Where he would have Scottie Pippen and Ron Harper come over to his house in the morning and they would work out and lift weights before practice started. Create your own breakfast club. There's other things around letting your manager know and other people on your team know that you are committing to doing that thing and creating some public accountability, and just make a game out of it. Make it something where you share how that session went afterwards as well. And then lastly, another great exercise to do is, I call it your sales math. It's sit down as an account executive and reverse engineer the target that you want to hit. So if your target is $1 million in sales, let's say, over the course of 12 months, you should have that broken down by what's my average deal size? 50K. Okay, I need to close 20 deals over the course of a year. What are my win rates? How much activity do I need to put in to produce a meeting? How many meetings would I need to do in order to run the intro calls? Just completely reverse engineer your goal down to the activity, just like you would if you were trying to lose weight or put on muscle. You would know how many times you got to work out, how many reps, how many sets you need to do of particular workouts, the calories that you need to eat. That's what you would do if you were serious about losing weight. You need to take that same level of seriousness to hitting your target. And what that's going to give you is a why behind the number. That's going to tell you in the 5 to 7 hours that I spend prospecting per week, here's the activity and the objective measurement of what I'm trying to accomplish, the activity I'm trying to put in, and the meetings that I'm trying to land. So I want to make it very real. So first step is commit. Second step is create some accountability. Third step is reverse engineer the numbers so that you can put purpose and intention into the activity.
All right. I love that. All right. So then I get folks to go, all right, I'm committed. Love that star NN, non-negotiable. I'm going to do this. Any recommendations on how do I better prepare for, let's say, I'm going to do a prospecting block in the morning. How do I prepare so that block is more effective?
Yeah, so there's a couple different components to outbound. I call it the outbound equation. So if you kind of look at outbound as a combination of both quality of my outreach and then quantity. So we can debate all day around, sales a quality game or is it a volume game? Obviously, it's both. You need both. So if we focus, we've already kind of talked about the quantity side of the equation, the amount of activity. If we talk about the quality side, it's a combination of fit, message, and delivery. So fit is your targeting. So let's start there. The first exercise you need to do is you need to reverse engineer what your best deals look like. This is, I don't know why, Carlos, companies don't do this. This is oftentimes the first exercise. Very large, successful companies don't do this. They don't look and say, hey, in the last 6 months, let's look at all of the opportunities that have been closed won and closed lost. And let's just look for the patterns around industries, employee count, triggers they experienced, who we met with first in the sales cycle, who the economic buyer was, the problem they were trying to solve, et cetera. Reverse engineer, and what you'll find, like I'm working with a client right now where 85% of their closed won deals are like traditional software companies that they sell a DevOps solution to. And then 15% is like, fintech companies and healthcare companies. Like these are very hard companies to sell to that have a lot of regulatory type of things they need to go through. I was like, why are we reaching out to those people right now? Let's just ignore those people. There's tons of traditional software companies that don't have these compliance regulations. Let's say no to all of that. And now as an account executive, I can look through my list of accounts of 100 or 200 or whatever it is and say, let me just ignore this 60% because they don't fit into my ICP and where I win the most and where I have the most personal knowledge. And let's again apply 80-20 rule. And basically what we're doing, Carlos, is the equivalent of setting out your workout clothes and your workout shoes the night before you got to wake up. Like, let's make it easy to start the task by going into the morning already knowing who I'm going to be reaching out to, and the accounts have already been selected, and I've already applied 80-20 rule and said, you know what, if I had to cherry pick, here are the ones that I would focus on. And if you want to take that a level deeper, you can then take that list and run it through Sales Nav, and you can cross-check and look for things like, are any of these companies hiring for relevant positions? Are there newly hired executives? Because newly hired executives I think they spend 70% of their budget in the first 100 days is a stat from UserGems. So are there new executives at these companies? Is there a certain department headcount or headcount growth that I could look for? There's so many ways that you can take a list of 100 and narrow it down to like 10 that are the most likely to respond right now. So that's the very first thing that you need to do as an account executive or SDR team or as a company is look at your targeting, apply 80-20 rule, and really prioritize the very best fit accounts and contacts for you to reach out to and spend your time on.
All right, Jason, I'm with you 100% on that. All right, so now I got my focus targets that I'm going after. Let's talk about what might make some of the best channels to use. Because, a lot of times you go, oh, yeah, I do social, I do email, I do phone. I go, how much? And what I usually see is they do very little phone outreach, even though it seems to have the best conversion rates. They do a truckload of emails because it's easy to put somebody in a cadence and then forget about them. And usually their cadence is too short. What are your perspective on which channels or how do you use all the channels to be more effective?
Yeah, the answer is all the channels. So it's email plus phone plus social. So what you need to think about first is, again, how you prioritize the people that you reach out to and how much effort that you put into each contact. And the idea here is that I'm not going to treat contacts equally, because a meeting with if you're in the case of me, a VP of sales is worth way more than a meeting with a sales manager. It's nothing against sales managers. It's just that if I can get a meeting with a VP of sales, that deal's going to move way faster. And I'm going to unlock access to a lot of the org by having a true champion. So if I know that the VPs or SVPs or the people in the C-suite are my tier ones, let's say, that's where I might do full phone plus email plus social, no automated touches in email, et cetera. I'm going to follow all of the traditional guidance and data. All the sales engagement tools support 12 to 15 touches across 3 to 4 weeks across 3 channels. So the pattern I recommend you start with if you're starting from scratch is 5 touches per week. On a Tuesday, you do a triple touch. You do email plus phone plus something on LinkedIn. And then 2 days later, you bump the email and you try calling another time and you follow that same pattern for 3 weeks. That's a great starting place for a tier 1s. Tier 2s, so these are meetings with maybe directors or heads or managers, let's say. It kind of depends on what you sell. I noticed that a lot of the more technical solutions where we're speaking with IT or developers or engineers, a good place to start tends to be at a manager or director level. That's oftentimes the entry point into the organization. So it depends on what you're selling. But these people typically are not as busy. They don't get as much outreach. So the meeting is easier to land. And what I might do there is I might have an email only sequence, and then I only call people that open the emails. And I do what I call following the engagement. So because those meetings are worth less to me, I don't spend as much of my manual effort on the outreach for those folks. And then lastly, a tier 3 might be individual contributors, your ICs. So like, for example, this customer I'm working with right now that sells a DevOps solution, talking to one of the engineers on the team might be a great way to get intel and an introduction. Now, I'm not going to like reach out to a bunch of engineers and like call them a ton and email them a ton and do all this other kind of stuff. That might be a purely automated. And when I say automated, they should not have the look and feel of an automated sequence. But I'm basically going to hit go and let it do its thing, knowing that I could reach out to a lot of these engineers. I probably don't have to customize it to get a response from them. And the meeting is not really worth that much to me, but it's a decent starting place if no one else responds. So my tier 3s might just be a purely automated sequence. So your tiering strategy is really important to look at. And again, when you reverse engineer where you win deals, a great thing to look at is who did the sales cycle start with? What was that person's role? And that'll give you kind of like the best path to breaking into a company and to tier out your sequencing strategy.
So I'm thinking through this a little bit. And one of the things that I hear a lot today is, well, let's face it, it's been a hot topic everywhere you go is AI. And on this podcast, we've had multiple people talk about everything from the death of business development to, no, it's going to be our greatest little co-pilot ever. So when you talked about your outreach, how much should we or shouldn't we rely on AI to kind of automate some of that outreach?
Yeah, so AI right now is an extra set of hands. It's not an extra brain. So if you're thinking that, if you don't believe me, just go try out the tools. If you've ever tried to give AI some prompts to make emails, all of the emails look really bad. Like you still have to take the email to the finish line.
Yep.
So AI is good in that it's an extra set of hands and it can get you maybe 80% of the way there or do a lot of the busy work for you. So for example, that tiering exercise that we talked about in reverse engineering, where you win, that's a great thing to have ChatGPT do. And pretty soon that's going to be built into Salesforce, where you can say, hey, Salesforce, tell me more about patterns you detect in our closed won deals. Specifically, this criteria 1 through 10. It's going to be able to tell you stuff like that. It's going to take a lot of what you would normally do in a spreadsheet and just spoon feed it for you. It's going to be able to recommend next steps or troubleshooting in a deal based on objective criteria that it's pulled, or maybe stuff it's pulled from transcripts and live recordings in conversational intelligence. But what it's not going to do, Carlos, is I don't think anytime soon, is it's not going to be able to say, hey, send this exact email to this person. We've customized it to you. We've already pulled not only their general interest, but we understand what they are responsible for. And based on all of the data that we've kind of collected and scraped together, here's a 3 or 4 sentence email you can fire off to them. It's not really going to do a very good job of that anytime soon. I just haven't seen anything very promising. So AI's use case really is in saving you time doing manual stuff. It's not doing the thinking for you. You absolutely should be using AI though.
I'm with you 100%. So when you're doing this outreach, you mentioned, kind of hitting more of those economic buyers, senior buyers, let's call them VP and above, and then kind of working your way down. I think it's really important to change your messaging in, that you're providing out there. And so many companies they just fall in the trap of talking about themselves. So as far as the messaging, any advice there?
So the way I think of messaging, so this is the question I ask big groups when I speak in front of them. I say, hey, everyone, what percentage of the time should you be talking in a cold call versus your prospect? What do you think the answers are, Carlos? What do you think they usually say?
If they're smart, they're saying a smaller percentage that we're talking and the customer should be talking more. But in reality, I know that isn't what happens.
Well, it's actually not what the data supports either. So, because people usually say, hey, I was taught you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionally. You should talk a third of the time. Well, when you're prospecting, if you think about it, if I cold called you and you didn't know who I was, to expect you to drive that conversation and do the majority of the talking that's kind of that's a high friction ask, high effort ask. Discovery conversation might be a little different though, because you've opted into that experience and you're agreeing to spend time with me. That's not necessarily the case in a cold call. So the point that I make in sharing that, so Gong's got data on nearly 100,000 cold calls, and the ones that end in the person scheduling a meeting, 55% talk time rep, 45% talk time prospect. For meetings that they didn't land, it was like 42% talk time rep. And talk time is not the only thing. And my point there is that it's not about speaking less than the prospect, it's about speaking about yourself less. So the content of the conversation is more important than the actual talk time. So what does that mean, and what should you be talking about? So the next exercise I need to do after targeting is I need to do a messaging exercise. And the best way to do this is we take our primary personas. So typically we want to do, Skip Miller talked a lot about above the line versus below the line selling, and how managers and ICs, buy things or what they care about compared to an above the line, which would be a VP or C-suite. And long story short, C-suite cares a lot about business outcomes, like senior VPs care a lot about business outcomes that really drive profit, revenue, reduce risk, that sort of stuff. And it's very strategic in nature, and it's very quarterly and yearly based. Our below the line counterparts, sales managers, let's use them as an example. They care a lot about, is my team hitting their activity today? How stressful is it for me to manage my team on a day-to-day basis? How can I make them more productive? They're thinking in terms of like hours and days and weeks, and it's very tactical, usually in nature. So messaging, what we need to do is we need to think about, independent of our solution, let's think about the big areas that our solution helps with. So I'll give you a customer example. One of the customers I work with, so like one of their customers is Target, for example. So what Target cares a lot about is reducing the amount of effort and expense related to servicing each of their customers. So in other words, they want to reduce the cost to serve. So when they have a customer support line, ironically, they don't want people to call in. They want them to help themselves through FAQ and through chat. It's less expensive to help people that way. So the above the line call center leader that imagine a VP overseeing thousands of customer service agents across the country or world. They care a lot about a really big priority called reducing cost to serve. I want to know next current solutions. So how are they getting the job done? They might be doing training, they might be doing surveys, etc. Then I want to talk about the problem associated with that. The problem is that when I do customer surveys, for example, I don't know about you, Carlos, I've never filled out a customer survey. Only 3 to 5% of customers actually fill out a survey. So what about the other 95%? Well, if I'm not capturing that data through, analyzing messaging, recordings, et cetera, and then gathering that at scale and using it to figure out where people get stuck and call in, I'm actually increasing the cost to serve because I'm putting all of these resources to work and it's not actually reducing the call volume. So I want to know this. I call it a messaging matrix. I want to know for this typical prospect, what are common priorities that we align with? What are current solutions? So how do they get the job done now if they're not using our solution? What problem does that create? And then ultimately, what is the outcome that they want to get? So the outcome in this case is reducing cost to serve, and it's usually by a specific dollar amount. They might say, hey, for all of our customers, we spend $120 per quarter per customer, or customers buy on average $50 per month from us, whatever that metric is, and that's something that we want to drive improvement in. So you want to be able to do what I just did here. Priorities, current solutions, problems, and then outcomes that they care about driving. I want to, as a team, map out what our typical personas care about, and then I can go to market with that messaging. So in a cold call, you didn't ask for this, but I think it's kind of good to hear an example. Like if I was cold calling one of these VPs in a call center, I like to use permission-based openers. So it might sound like, hey, Carlos, was just on your FAQ page. Notice that you got your phone number right there at the top. Oh, by the way, it's Jason with Outbound Squad. You got a minute for me to share the reason for my call? Now, the prospect after hearing that is going to be like, what? You're on our FAQ? Like, they're not going to know what the heck's going on. Hey, again, my name's Jason. I'm with Outbound Squad. The reason I was giving you a call, again, I noticed that you have a phone number at the top of your FAQ page. This is where the priority comes in. Typically, when I'm speaking to call center leaders like yourself, the number one thing they want to do is reduce cost to serve. And the FAQ pages and chats, all of that is actually creating more call center volume and driving up the cost. And they can't really figure out why. I'm just curious how, if at all, that resonates with you. And usually if I've done that well and it's personalized and I'm speaking about them, I haven't talked about my solution yet, but I'm sort of implying what we help with because I'm talking about their specific area. The prospect is either going to play ball and have a conversation with me at that point, or they're going to ask, wait, so what do you do? And they're asking me what we do instead of me pitching them. So that's what that might sound like in a call.
I love that, Jason. You're really talking about their problem, their situation to get them to actually engage at the beginning.
Correct.
If I said that right. So let's talk about the other side of that coin is, I am the worst at picking up a cold call. And if I do, it's usually because I thought the number was somebody else. So once they start, they could be telling me that I won the lottery and they're sending me money. I immediately basically turn them off and, the objections come up. Any advice on, having, what kind of structure or method should you have to do a better job of handling that objection? Because everybody has that fear and, oh God, it's somebody pitching me something. Again, half the time they're not listening. So they're just thinking, I gotta get off this phone. And what, any advice there on doing a more effective job of handling that initial objection?
Yeah. I think before we get into that with objections, I find that we invite a lot of objections due to how we interact with customers, prospective customers. So these are called invisible scripts. So an invisible script is, an example of it would be when I was in middle school, the question was, where are you going to college? It was not if you were going to college or not. The invisible script that we have in America is that you should go to college because that's better than getting a blue collar job, right? So you don't even think about that. It's just implied through all of the messaging that we receive. Our prospects have invisible scripts based on all of the interactions they've had with salespeople, and they kind of lump all salespeople, B2B, B2C, the person at the mall, the person they interact with at the gas station, et cetera. They kind of lump all of us into one category. And the invisible script is not a good one. People think that salespeople are pushy, that they don't care about them, that they're pitchy, they're too persistent, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to do things that show the prospect that we are different than these spammers and telemarketers. So it starts in a cold call. I think of it in three parts. It's intro, hook, and close. In the intro, 80% of cold calls are lost in the first 60 seconds. And it has a lot to do with tonality and what you say. So if my tonality sounds like a telemarketer, and I come in really hot and excited, hey, Carlos, it's Jason with Outbound Squad, I sound like a telemarketer. If I don't have something about them in that first 60 seconds, I sound like a telemarketer. If I start talking about my solution, we help, if I say that language, I sound like a telemarketer. So I want to do things that don't put me in that same bucket as a telemarketer. That's number one. The second part of it is, because you asked about objections, the most common objections you're going to get are these reflexive objections. So Daniel Kahneman wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And the short of it is that there's kind of two modes that our brain is in. System one is like this reflexive mode of I'm doing things and I'm not even thinking about it, like brushing my teeth. System two thinking is more like calculated. So that's, I'm brushing my teeth and I stub my toe. And now all of a sudden I'm thinking about my toe and I'm like actively thinking about what I'm doing. It's the mode that we are in during this conversation. So most prospects in that first minute are in system 1. Our goal is to get them into system 2 thinking. So system 1, essentially what the prospect is objecting to is they don't really have an objection per se. It's mostly that they're objecting to being interrupted. Like you called them, they thought that you were someone else. Like you said, I don't believe any prospect picks up a cold call on purpose. They thought that you were someone else. And what a prospect needs in that moment is acknowledgement. They need you to acknowledge that you interrupted them. And it's as simple as this. The 2-part objection handling framework is greet and then respond or handle. The greet is when someone's like, hey, I'm about to step into a meeting. Oh, hey, not a problem, Carlos. Or got it. Or all good. Or sounds like I caught you in the middle of something. Any variation of that is totally good. I just want to acknowledge what the person just shared with me. And ideally, if I can do it in a relaxed tone, relaxed pace, and not sound defensive, that's even better. So what I like to say is I want to make it really hard to be an asshole to me. Okay? I want to make it really hard for you to be mean to me. So not interested, not right now, whatever it might be in that first 60 seconds, it's going to be a combination of that or send me an email. Hey, not a problem. Or, hey, sounds like I totally caught you in the middle of something. And if the person said not interested before I even got a chance to do my reverse pitch, what I shared earlier, I might say, hey, not a problem, Carlos. I did actually do some research on you. Do you mind if I just take 30 seconds to share what I found and you can decide if you want to hang up on me or not? And most people will say yes to that. Most of them will. If someone says, send me an email, hey, Carlos, not a problem. Happy to send you an email. I'm just really curious. I mentioned reducing cost to serve earlier. What priorities does your team have right now around reducing cost to serve, if you don't mind sharing, so I can get a good email over to you? And I get the person to share a little bit more. Hey, Carlos, typically what I find is that if I send an email over to you, it'll be super generic. Do you think we could just maybe put 10 or 15 minutes on the calendar tomorrow? I'll send you the email. And then you can cancel the invite if you don't like what you see. And if you do, we'll keep the time. Does that sound fair? Cool. And we can go from there. I don't know what other examples you want me to give, but that's generally the advice is we create a lot of the objections by how we go about calling. So let's not create unnecessary objections. Let's prevent as many of them as we can. And 2, don't try to handle the objection right away. Like make the objective when you get an objection to have genuine dialogue and conversation. How can I just be real with this person and get them to be real with me? Typically, that's going to be a more effective way to do that is to acknowledge what I heard and to not argue with them and try to change their mind right away.
So early on, we said, hey, it's this training, but it's also coaching. And I think leaders are a key part of success of any team, especially if you want them to be consistent over time. So talk me through a little bit of, do you have any strategies or frameworks around how do we make this stick for the team and not just leave it up to the individuals, right? Make it part of the culture of an organization, if you will, or a team.
And that's where you get long form ROI. That's the long tail of any sales training is the reinforcement. So there's a 4-part framework. We don't have a ton of time to go super in depth with it, but it's teach, practice, observe, and coach. We've already done a lot of the teaching part. The teaching part is the tactics and the strategies and the what to do in this moment and all of that kind of stuff, right? The practice and observe parts are the 2 areas that tend to get neglected. So practice, reps tend to practice new techniques for the first time in live situations where the stakes are really high. Let's try to eliminate that. And let's facilitate practice. An example of that would be almost every sales manager has a 1-hour standing team meeting every week. Why don't you spend the first 10 minutes of that meeting putting your team into breakout rooms in Zoom and letting them practice? Role play a cold call each, or role play handling a specific objection that people are coming across. Like facilitate the practice. You want to encourage people to practice on their own. In my experience, very rarely does that happen. Your top 10% of people will practice on their own. 90% of the team's not going to do it. You got to facilitate it weekly. The third thing, observe. There's so many, I think we call them dashboard junkies is what I've heard people call them. There's so many sales managers just sit in dashboards all day when they should be spending at least half of their day coaching Coaching doesn't mean you have to ride shotgun with people, by the way, although I think that's a great thing to do in sales calls. But you should be, if your focus in that Monday meeting in your one-on-one was how do I help, this AE make, self-source more pipeline, and they're focused on making more calls. Well, I should just select some calls that they've made to listen to throughout the week and just send them over some feedback as they make them. I should do that with them. The observation part, watching people do the actual thing and getting feedback on it is great. And then lastly, the coaching piece. So I need to not only observe what's going on, I actually need to coach the rep. And typically what I find is if you have some sort of scorecard that a rep, they could score and coach themselves. So for example, they could listen to a cold call recording and they could grade themselves. If you have them attempt to coach themselves and then bring that into your one-on-one, that's where massive learning happens, where you basically get to kind of refine what the rep thinks they're doing versus what they're actually doing. It also creates an environment where your team, God, so many managers run teams and it's just their team is constantly peppering them with these little questions. And it's just you need to empower them through a system or scorecard or some sort of thing that helps them answer their own questions. Especially when it's the prospect gave me this objection, what do I do? Well, let's talk about it. You know what the framework is for this. What do you think you should do? How could you greet that objection? We talked about 3 or 4 different ways that you could respond to that. Which one did you try? Which one do you think you should try? And that takes longer to do. That was honestly my biggest learning as a sales manager, was not giving reps the answers all the time and helping them come up with their own answers and actually empowering them to do that.
I'm with you 100%. And it's funny you mentioned about dashboard junkies. A lot of times I meet these first line and second line managers and they just, I'm managing the team. Yeah, you're managing a number. You coach people and it gets lost in translation. And some of it is, like you said, they need to be taught how to be better coaches and better managers, right? Versus just looking at a number. Hey, Jason, I wish we could talk all day, but people tell me I can only make these so long. So here's my last question today. This has been an excellent podcast. I really appreciate it. But we call it acceleration insight. What might be that one piece of advice? It could be business or personal that you would give our listeners so that they could be as effective as you are at achieving their goals.
Rub shoulders and get in the pit. So we've talked a lot about cold calling. If you're a manager and you're not willing to get in the pit with your reps and get in there and show them how it's done some of the time, they're not going to respect you. If you're a VP of sales or CRO, some of the best VPs I know hop on sales calls with reps. They don't need to do that, but it keeps them grounded in what the day-to-day life is like for the rep. And think about how much respect your reps are going to have for you as a sales executive. If you show them that you're willing to do the thing that you're asking of them, you don't even have to crush it. Just showing them that you're willing to do that and sitting in the seat of the rep and going through all of your enablement content, you'll see a lot of gaps in your enablement that way too. But sit in the seat, get in the pit, rub shoulders with your team. That's the number one thing you could literally start doing today after you listen to this that will make an immediate effect on this month and this quarter.
That's excellent. I think it's so easy for people to forget how hard sales can be when they look at it from the outside. So getting in the pit is a great way to remind you of the whole thing. So Jason, thank you so much for being on the podcast. If our listeners wanted to know more about you, your company, your services, what might be a great way for them to engage with you?
Outboundsquad.com is going to be the best place. So we got tons of free stuff on there. So we have a podcast, Outbound Squad, as well. I post daily content on LinkedIn. We got tons of free guides, all that kind of stuff. And if you're an individual or company looking to put some of the stuff that we've talked about into action, outboundsquad.com is the best place to do that. We have team training programs, coaching for teams big and small to help you put this into action and self-source more pipeline for your account executives and land higher quality meetings and more of them for your business development reps as well. You can reach out to us at outboundsquad.com.
Awesome. And Jason, you're welcome back again. We can always dive into any aspect of this because I think it's really useful stuff. All right, everyone, that does it for this episode. Please check us out at b2brevexec.com. Share this episode with your friends, families, your dogs, your cats. You can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. And if you listen to us on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review. I'm Carlos Noche, and until next time, I wish you nothing but the greatest success.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.